heavenly fare of Shahjahanabad, Nahari, Qorma, Biryani, and beyond. The Mehmaan for this session is Janab Vir Sanghvi Sahab, Mr. Vir Sanghvi, and our Mezban is Janab Sadaf Hussain. Sadaf Hussain is a versatile figure, excelling as a writer, author, and chef with a keen interest in food history and law. He's authored 2 food books, with 2 more in the pipeline, including an exploration of spices. Collaborating with the University of Sheffield, he delved into Rampur cuisine.
Welcome, or the welcome, khair maqdam, istiqbal, everything in different languages. So I mean, it's irony to say, not irony, it's funny. Often we start with the same thing. Person needs no introduction, but so I'll start with the same thing.
Thank you. Likewise. Yeah.
Vir Sanghvi doesn't need introduction.
Thank you.
But one of my absolute favorite person,
Thank
in
you.
all honesty. I'm not saying because we are sitting here, but in all honesty, because I think almost
Thank
all
you.
of us have read both his commentary on politics and food at the same time. And we were just talking about it, how it's difficult often, but it's easy for Vir Sanghvi to switch hats. So Vir Sanghvi is a prominent Indian journalist, anchor, author, and notable figure in the culinary world, renowned for contribution to print and broadcast media, including his role as the editor of Hindustan Times. We all have read HT Brunch, I'm assuming. Sanghvi is also celebrated for his articulate writing and engaging communication style beyond journalism. He's hosted-
Yeah, you said you weren't going to introduce me.
One paragraph.
Yeah, sure.
So essentially, the idea of conversation here is to
Yeah.
explore food.
Yeah.
Delhi ke khane, or over the period of time, Delhi ke khane में changes क्या आए हैं. And I was attending one of sessions 15th को with जावेद अख्तर साहब and सैफ महबूब साहब जो अभी शायद बाहर बैठे हैं. And interestingly, जावेद साहब said that ज़बान बदलती है. And I am a prominent, I feel that's true. And I say ज़बान, तमीज़, तहज़ीब और खाना चारों over the period बदलता है. जिस तरीके से आप बोलते हैं, खालिस हिंदी, खालिस उर्दू से लेके खालिस संस्कृत से आप जिसको हम इंग्लिश बोलते हैं, खिचड़ी भी बन जाती है. वो बोलचाल की भाषा है. फिर जो हम आज हम जिसको बोलते हैं जेनजी लैंग्वेजेस को हमें से भी लगे क्या बात कर रहे यार, व्हाट इज़ दिस जेनजी लैंग्वेज, वी डोंट अंडरस्टैंड. तो वो भी है. उसी तरीके से खाना ही बदलता है. जो हम पहले खाते थे वो हम अभी नहीं खाते हैं, और शायद जो हम अभी खा रहे हैं वो आज से 10 साल बाद शायद नहीं खाएंगे. Right. Now the question that I wanted to ask is that this evolution, right?
Yeah.
We start from, let's say, we're talking about meal ki Delhi. So roughly like a 19th century, where you had the meal, you had Ghalib and everybody else talking about food in bits and pieces, right? But that's a time when transitions happening from the Mughal Sultanate to, in a way, more of British Sultanate, British era, and now modern times. So how have you seen in your writing, in your documentation of the food over the period of time, new places coming up from a time when eating out was looked down upon? That तुम्हारे घर में तुम्हारी usually considering mothers would cook at home, तुम्हारे घर में तुम्हारी माँ नहीं है, तुम्हारे घर में खाना नहीं बनता है, बाहर क्यों खा रहे हो? To now, where mother would say, hey, please, बाहर से मंगा ले यार, or father, whoever's cooking. So how have you seen this space changing over the period of time?
It's changed a lot, but I want to make a few general points. The first of those is that a great city like, say, Delhi, the food never belongs to one particular community, because there are so many communities, there are so many different food traditions, that all food traditions are not ancient. Many food traditions are relatively recent. You talked about the eating out. Moti Mahal opens in Delhi in the 1950s. The original was in Peshawar in the 30s or so. Tandoori chicken becomes popular as a dish only in the 1950s. And butter chicken, those of you who've read the newspapers, now a matter for his lordships to decide, is a dish that comes from the late 50s, early 60s. And yet that whole Delhi tandoori cooking tradition, which is essentially a Hindu refugee tradition, is very much a Delhi tradition. So there is no one tradition. There is, yes, a tradition of Delhi Sultanate from the Mughal Empire. Then there is a tradition that comes from elsewhere. My friend Rati will tell you that the Mathurs are the original inhabitants of Delhi and their food is the real food. Yeah, well, maybe, but it's not necessarily true. The Banyas of Chandni Chowk will tell you that their food is their food. I don't think there is any one tradition in any great city. I also think that the genius of a great city is that it takes dishes that come from all over, not just from other parts of India, but from the rest of the world, and it makes them her own. Let's take the example of the samosa. We know it's a Middle Eastern, Central Asian dish under different names like sambusak, etc. A triangular pastry, sometimes fried, sometimes baked. It has, if you research its history into the Mediterranean period, it has pretty much the same origins as the calzone, which we now regard as a Italian pizza thing, or an empanada. It comes to India, and it comes to India as a very specific kind of dish. And every community gets its hands on it, and you have different samosas all over Delhi, let alone the rest of India. So is the samosa a dish from the Middle East? Is it an Indian dish? Is it a dish belonging to any one community? Is it the Muslim cooks who used to cook it in the royal court who own it? Is it the Banyas in Chandni Chowk who make chaat with it? Is it their dish? So when we talk about the food of Delhi, we sometimes talk too narrowly. The truth is, this is a great city. It has many, many food traditions. All of them are deserving of respect. All of them, I think, are worth admiring. There is, and we can talk about this later, now a certain amount of political correctness creeping in, where they try and say that this is a foreign dish and this is an Indian dish, etc. I mean, that's crap, and I think we should fight it.
Thank you. Okay. I have a question for you guys, which we'll take it later. But I have a question for you as well. One, of course, is because you talked about the Mathur cuisine. I'm sure everyone sitting here are from different parts of the country, if not the world. So thinking on the lines ki Delhi का खाना आखिर है क्या? Yeah, how do you define Delhi खाना, right? एक पिछले हफ्ते मैं नीचे रूम में एक इवेंट पे था and मैंने बोला कि छोले भटूरे. So then one lady was like, नहीं छोले भटूरे दिल्ली खाना नहीं है. So I said, okay. So that's a question for you. But a question for you as well, Vir, is that when you talk about food from that space, right? तो अब एक जो interesting आजकल conversation, actually सदियों का conversation है ये about biryani. We can't. Okay. Let's answer elephant in the room. So now, of course, there's a whole thing about biryani that, you know, and no, I'm not talking about biryani and pulao difference. That you fight.
But it's a good discussion to have.
Good discussion. Yeah. We'll come to that as well.
All right.
So whether biryani is an Indian dish, quote unquote Muslim dish. Couple of days back, I was doing my research and I found out there are these two couplets in Ramayana where it talks about a precursor of biryani in a way, right? That how they cooked meat and chawal together.
Yeah.
Some version, right? So that's there. Then there's of course the second AD's Onsuru is also is a Tamil text. It's also, it calls out biryani as again precursor, right? So those are two things. Then of course, but then biggest chunk says that, oh no, but biryani comes from Persia and like an inspired pilaf or something of that sort. Okay. Then there's of course the whole discussion about whether biryani is Delhi or Lucknow. So where? Or Hyderabad, right?
Hyderabad is much later. Son of biryani, it's not the original.
Hyderabad went. Yeah. But Lucknow and then Delhi. So, but where is the origin of biryani? And also adding on to that question is, whoever loves food knows about Chef Imtiaz Qureshi, a legend in food space, and he passed away on 16th, and at the age of 93. One of his interviews I was reading, and then where he says that biryani kuch nahi hoti hai. Sab pulav hai, pulav ke derivatives hai. However, if you go to Dampukht, it is Dampukht biryani. So there's a lot of debate on biryani, including Zomato is giving the data that Indian loves biryani, not khichdi.
Okay. Yeah, like 3 different things about biryani. Let's take them one by one. The first, and I think we sometimes lose sight of this, is that there's rice in China and there's rice in India. There was very little rice in the rest of the world. There are 2 theories about how rice traveled out of India. One theory, which is hard to substantiate, is when Alexander's army went back and they went via the Middle East. They took rice with them. They'd never seen it before. The other is a few centuries later, when the Arabs conquered Sindh, they discovered rice, and they took it back with them. We know that Arabia is not ideal for rice because it doesn't have as much water as paddy would require. So clearly it's something they got from elsewhere. But having got it, they took it out. If you look at the Spanish tradition of paella in Valencia and places, that comes from the Moors. Now, the Moors is basically sort of sophisticated way of saying Arabs, but basically the Arabs went and civilized those Europeans and taught them how to do rice. The same thing happened in Italy. If you look at the risotto tradition in Italy, that too comes from the Moors, as they were called. So, if you were to trace the origins of rice and all rice dishes all over the world, except perhaps China and the Far East, it's Indian. It's our discovery, our dishes, our invention. Now, what happens is, throughout history, people cook rice with meat. That's not such a big deal. It's a pretty obvious combination. If somebody tells you that people make a bread and have it with meat, you don't think it's unusual. So why is cooking rice with meat so unusual? He gave you the example of references in Ramayana. People have found various Tamil scholars, very agitated Tamil scholars, have found endless references to dishes made with rice and meat in Sangam literature. And they have said, we invented biryani. And there's even a word in Tamil, which I don't remember, which sounds a little like pulao, and they said, ye hamara hai. In fact, it's nobody's. It's a pretty common way of doing it. What is clear, I think, and there's enough documentary evidence in old cookbooks, is that in the Middle East and perhaps in Persia, they certainly did cook rice with meat. And the pulao or the pilaf or whatever you want to call it came from there. It is not unreasonable to believe that that version of the pulao came to India. If you're a historian, you will say with travelers, traders. If you're a Sanghi, you will say with invaders. But it basically did come to India from that part of the world. What did we do? We took pulao, which essentially is a fairly blandish sort of dish, and we invented biryani. There is no biryani, historical record of biryani anywhere else in the world. You will be told that there is a dish which sounds like biryani in Persia. There is such a dish. It has no rice in it. Many people, like my friend Pushpesh Pant, say there may have been rice in it at one stage. Yeah, well, maybe. But the point is, there is no biryani anywhere. It was created in India. It's our take on the pulao tradition. We took it and we took it forward. What advantage did we have? And I think we sometimes underestimate that. I get into a lot of trouble when I go to the Middle East, when I see the food of Morocco and all of that, is essentially a rough first draft for Indian food, because it came here and we added spices. These guys didn't understand spices, they didn't know spices. My co-panelist is doing a book on spices, so he will tell you about it. Spice is the root of India's genius and the source of many of our problems, because that's how we got colonized, because we did spices. Biryani is an example of the Indian genius of taking rice that went out and came back to us in the form of pulao and became a dish that was completely different. We're talking about where biryani was invented. There is no actual accurate representation. One version is that it was at the Mughal court. Another version, which I'm more inclined to believe, is that pulao, which is cooked in stock and all of that, was a court dish. Biryani, which was made in huge dekchis, etc., was a common dish. It was made to feed armies, it was made to feed people. There are some records that date to Shah Jahan's time, others to the invention to Noor Jahan. I mean, I don't necessarily attribute much authenticity to those accounts, but it's, I think, beyond dispute that biryani becomes popular during the Mughal period. It then travels to Lucknow with the Nawabs of Awadh, who try and take the cuisine of the Mughal court, and they then add their own stuff to it. They make it different, they make it more delicate. And when the Nizam-ul-Mulk goes to Hyderabad, he takes cooks with him from Delhi, and they create Hyderabad biryani. So that's one route. There's a problem with that whole theory of origins of biryani, because there are records of very similar rice dishes with Arab influences in Kerala much before the Delhi biryani was invented. So what seems most likely is that because they had trade connections between Kerala and the Middle East, even before the birth of the Prophet, that there was an intermingling of dishes. And the Malayali biryanis, at least some of them, came from there, came from the Middle East via directly by boat without the intervention of the Mughal Empire or anybody. That's controversial, but certainly it wasn't called biryani originally. They only call it biryani now out of convenience. So there are many, many kinds of biryani. All of them, I think, have some kind of origin in pulao or something. Even the one in the south, presumably got some kind of pulao from Yemen, which is who they used to trade with. But the making of biryani with spices, making it our own way, is purely Indian. And it shows you the traditions of India. If you take the Hyderabadi biryani, which is more khatash, etc., it's clearly cooks from North India who've been influenced by the spices and the flavors of the Deccan Plateau, which I'm sure you're going to write about. And that's a different biryani. If you take the biryani of Lucknow, or the pulao of Lucknow, which is yet another discussion, it's essentially about fragrance, right? It's now been destroyed because most people who make Lucknow biryani now are sort of frustrated perfumers and they put too much kevda and all of that in it. But the point of that biryani is aroma. So I always think that biryani is a dish that unites India. It's an example of something we took from abroad, we made our own, and we have regional variations everywhere. And there is, of course, Hyderabad, there's, of course, Lucknow. But nobody talks about the biryanis of the Gujarati Muslims, the khojas, the mehmans, the boras, which to my mind are perhaps the best biryanis in India. So biryani is complicated. There used to be a very famous historian called Nurul Hasan, who some of you may remember, who was governor of West Bengal when I lived there. And my boss, Avi Sarkar, took him aside and said, I wanted to ask you what you thought of Rampur biryani. And Nurul Hasan told him, sit down. He said, I take 2 days to discuss biryani. I don't make casual remarks, and then left. So I think biryani is one of those things.
Yeah, no, in fact, Chef Qureshi said the same thing. He says the only kind of biryani is Rampur biryani, which is bold claim. But
okay, since we go into this whole imtiaz thing, and there's been a lot of misquoting of what he says, what he used to say, and I had several conversations with him on this subject, his claim, and that is accurate, was that biryani was usually made in large quantities in Lucknow. It was always called a pulao. It was not called a biryani. And there are endless explanations of whether it was because the meat was cooked with the rice or when the onions were cooked, all of which tend to vary. Yeah. However, he said, and we can argue about this, he says his contribution to the service of biryani in restaurants was that he started doing individual portions, which he sealed and dum cooked. It no longer came in a large dekchi. When he invented the dum cooked biryani, which nearly everybody has copied, every restaurant that serves biryani, he added flavorings which would not traditionally be in a Lucknow biryani. He was inspired somewhat by the biryanis of Hyderabad. So he was comfortable calling the dum-cooked version of biryani, but insisted that Lucknow was pulao.
Yeah. And just because we're on that topic, it's a question that's in my mind always, that, and because biryani, because Mughal, and then we'll move beyond that because it's not about Mughal Delhi. Agra. Nobody talks about Agra used to be the capital at a certain point in time. Nobody talks about Agra as the Mughaliya cuisine. Yeah. It's always Lucknow's biryani and Delhi's biryani, but poor Agra, small city. There's also not a great place to eat in Agra.
But there is a theory to the effect that biryani was invented in Agra.
Yeah, but
but we have no evidence, no? Like, you go to a restaurant and they'll say, will you have a Lucknowi biryani? Will you have a Hyderabad biryani? Will you have a Rampur biryani? Has anyone said to you, do you want a Mughal biryani from Delhi? We don't seem to remember what that tradition was.
Yeah. I mean, Shahjahan, it's documented that biryani came during Shahjahan's time, so that's a good thing. My research says that the first biryani ever cooked was with brown rice and not with white rice, so that's also interesting. Brown basmati, which existed before Pusa took over and then started coming up with
new variants of
basmati, including the Delhi's Sela rice. So that's that. Now, on that biryani conversation and Delhi's conversation about a lot of cultural intermingling, which you mentioned, right? Because of travel, trade, everything. And then when I'm saying cultural intermingling, I'm talking about the migrants, I'm talking about English colonial impact as well, I'm talking about partition as well. And how much has that impacted in the way we consumed food, in the way we appreciated food?
Yeah, I think the colonial influence on Indian food is much underrated when you talk about what did the British, the Portuguese give to India, and you basically end up with saying food at Gymkhana Club or the cutlets or so. But it's not true. So much of what we now consider Indian food depends on ingredients that were discovered in the New World. If the New World had not been discovered, if the Portuguese and the British had not brought things to us, we would have no chilies, we would have no Indian food, we'd have no tomatoes, we'd have no potatoes. I mean, you can just go on and on. Can you imagine Indian cuisine without any of those ingredients? Corn. Yeah, every time one Punjabi tells me that this recipe for his makke ki roti is thousands of years old, I say, Saleh, 200 years ago the British planted corn in Punjab. How can it be that way? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Rajma. Rajma also is a new world thing. So all these people who are in Jammu, they've been growing this Rajma for hundreds of years. No, sorry, they can't. They didn't know what it was. So even, yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's a different debate, but he's got to decide where he wants to start it.
Yes, I'll come to the questions as well, because we'll have, and we were actually talking about khichdi as well.
We will talk about khichdi.
We will come to khichdi as well. So when I'm saying colonial, I'm also talking about the intermingling, and in a way, for example, the whole Anglo-Indian cuisine or Indo-Pondicherry, Indo-French, which is in Pondicherry. Similar, what have you seen in Delhi, for example, where food in a way changed? And that could be a Kayastha community as well, food, or a Bihari influence on food in Delhi, or just English influence on foods of Delhi.
I find, in terms of ingredients, huge influences from Europe. In terms of techniques, not that much. I think the Middle East had more influence on the way we cook than anything that we learned from white people. For instance, until the Middle Easterners get here, until the Arabs and Central Asians get here, there is very little evidence of any cooking with maida in India. Everything was atta. The whole baking tradition was brought to us from the Middle East, which is why there's been a strong Muslim tradition with bakeries, because it was something they did. There was a second baking tradition, which was brought to Goa by the Portuguese. And therefore, they merged sometimes. If you take the pav, which is the pav of vada pav and pav bhaji in Bombay, it's essentially a merger of the Muslim tradition of making bread and the Portuguese tradition of making pav. So yes, there are many similar instances, but not that many. I don't think white people really change the way we eat, except for ingredients.
Okay. So, I mean, for example, I'm thinking of breakfast, right?
Yeah.
And we think about and this is widely popular as when Delhi and Shahjahanabad was being settled, people from UP came and they brought the Biryani or bedmi puri.
Yeah.
But so what was the breakfast like? Then bedmi puri comes in, and then comes the English influence, which is bread jam, and comes now Kellogg's time when you have cereals, and now the modern time when you have muesli.
कोई नहीं खाता यार वो muesli 1% of the population or something. Yeah.
And paratha.
Agreed. I also think that the English breakfast, people say the only way you can eat well in England is to have breakfast 4 times a day. On the other hand, they have the same bloody breakfast every day, na? Yeah. Eggs every morning, bacon every morning, sausages every morning. Indians would die if we had to eat the same breakfast every single day. Yeah. We have so many breakfast dishes.
You have like 5,000 kinds of parathas only.
Yeah, yes.
Anything
even eggs, we do more interesting things than they do. Na? Or something is much more interesting
than
anything they've ever invented.
So on that, I have the idea of the whole thing on, because we're talking about this, in a way, puri sabzi becomes street food, if you call that. The evolution or the role of street food for common people. Because often we hear about all the books, actually, if you will see, I have almost never been able to figure out what were the commoners eating. Apart from that, we know, for example, Nahari is what commoners were eating, and we'll come to Nahari in a bit. But mostly these are royal food. What has been the contribution, in a way, for street food in this evolution, and how for all the migrants actually,
Yeah.
so all the people who come in.
It's a difficult one to answer because street food means many different things. You know, in India now, when we talk about street food, it's a shorthand for chaat. And yet, chaat is not an all India thing. You go south of the Vindhyas, there is no chaat in South India. They've never heard of it, they don't make it. Street food, and if you go to these street food festivals that the National Association of Street Vendors organizes every year, you will find people doing golgappas and stuff like that. But all the South Indian stalls will be mutton curry and rice or chicken curry and rice. So often street food in parts of India was not particularly different. It was just dishes made in large quantities at relatively low cost to feed people who didn't have the money to cook at home, didn't have homes with kitchens or whatever. The chaat tradition is a different one. And it's a complicated tradition because we all know the story of an emperor being told by his hakims that he should eat chaat, etc. I mean, frankly, it's a fairly dodgy story. But we do know that what is the sort of chaat tradition did not originate in Delhi, so kill me God. It originated in UP probably. And it's guys from UP and Bihar who took chaat all over the rest of India. Let's take Calcutta. If you ever had Calcutta chaat, it's about the best chaat there is in India except for Lucknow. Not one Bengali has ever made chaat in his life. They're all Biharis who've come from Bihar and made chaat there and created a tradition. In Bombay, chaat was brought in the 19th century by people from UP. We know this because the people of Bombay, who were not as cosmopolitan then as they are today, called them bhiyas. So it was always regarded as bhiya ka chaat. But again, like all great cities, they took that chaat and they created bhelpuri, which is a great Bombay dish, but it was created only from Bombay using recipes from UP and Bihar. So chaat is complicated. I'm never sure. We'll take Daulat ki chaat, sold all over Delhi as a great Delhi invention, etc. It's very similar to Malayo, Makhan Malai, Nimish, and other dishes in Lucknow. My friend, the chef, Kunal Kapoor, who some of you may know from television, decided to find out if there was a difference. And he went and worked for several days with the guys who were making Daulat ki chaat in Old Delhi. All of them were from UP. All of them made Nimish in UP. And they came to Delhi only because they could make money selling it and calling it Daulat ki chaat. So these things are controversial.
Yeah. No, in fact, last year during Ramazan time, I was doing a research on breads of Delhi. And I reached to Lajpat. And I wanted to speak with Afghan people because they are also bread makers of Delhi.
Right.
The owners were Afghan people, but the people who were actually making the breads were Biharis. Right. So I'm like, wait, how is this? So he said, we know how to make Afghan bread. To know how to eat Afghan bread, you don't have to have Afghanis to make the bread. Right. Sure, it will add some flair, like, oh, Kashmiris can only make good Kashmiri food, or the Lucknow can only make good biryani, but it's tricky.
I don't trust that. I mean, if it was true, then there would be no Italian restaurants in India. There would be no Chinese restaurants in India because they're not Chinese people or Italians making the food. No?
And before I open up the question, one more thing about, and this is my particular interest area, is role of gender, role essentially. And this was a question which we were discussing yesterday and another event as well, which was women versus men cooking. Yeah. Chef Manisha from ITC, she was talking about that how everything was nice and hunky-dory when women were cooking at home, but when it became commercialization of the food, then the men took over. Then, of course, the ways of eating, ways of cooking. For example, I like the great example of Sunday mutton curry. I feel like that's a very hardcore man's food because it have no logic in it. There's no pattern in it. When men cook, usually, when men are not the cook, but they like to cook on Sundays, they will take their own sweet time. It's a lunch thing usually because the men will start cooking in the morning and they will take 3-4 hours to cook mutton nicely, putting all the khada masalas usually, and then you get Sunday mutton curry. And usually, traditionally, men will have a separate kitchen, which will outside the house because women, who's the matriarch, so to speak, of the kitchen, will not let them enter. So the whole role of women in when it comes to influencing the food, even for irrespective of the time, whether it was Mughal, whether it was Mir ki Dilli, or whether it was Angrezo ki Dilli, how have women in a way shaped up the way we eat food?
I honestly don't have an answer. I think men were expected to earn the family's living. Cooking, working in restaurants was one way of doing it. The women were expected to feed you at home. And they did it without any adequate reward, without any kind of recognition. And it's worse. It's a tradition that has continued in India, has continued even when there are women working. So we have this bizarre system where the guy works, he comes home in the evening, puts his feet up and has a drink. The woman works, comes home, goes into the kitchen and makes dinner for everyone, looks after the kids. At some stage, I think that gender role will have to break.
Yeah. I always say, for people who are not married, and if you're thinking of marrying a chef, never.
The guy never cooks at home, no?
Yeah, the guy will never cook.
Never cook at home. Yeah.
He will not have time because he's mostly in the kitchen, like 6 days a week.
Yeah.
And when he comes home, he's not going to cook for you. So it's only going to be you or your house help. So never marry a chef, basically.
Better to marry a Zomato account than to marry a chef.
Or that.
At least you'll get food that way.
So that's a
Yeah. True.
for you guys.
Yeah.
I would like to. Now, I lost the microphone. Hello. Oh, okay. Sorry, I pushed off.
Yeah, all right.
All right. Now I think I'll have. Yeah. So, last question before we get into the, because we talked about khichdi. This entire identity politics of sort.
Yeah.
Which is that, oh, biryani is not our food, khichdi is. So the whole discussion started a few years back, and there was this huge cauldron where almost all the known chefs came together to cook khichdi and saying khichdi is our food. Can you really put down saying one homogenized khichdi which everybody eats? Because that's what all the chefs were doing.
Yeah, there is no such thing as a khichdi. Khichdi was the food of people, not necessarily poor people, but people from all over India. And each region made its own variation, its own version of khichdi. There's a famous story about the Emperor Jahangir going to Gujarat and eating a khichdi there and coming back and making his cooks in the royal kitchen make it and going vegetarian on the day when he ate a khichdi. But if you say I have a Bengali khichdi, it's not necessarily a vegetarian khichdi. A Gujarati khichdi is not necessarily made with rice. The version that Jahangir made was made with bajra. I think it was made with different grains. So this whole idea of taking what is a home dish and a dish with many, many variations and bringing it together. I mean, the whole sense of a khichdi is different ingredients, right? That's how we use the word. And khichdi in many ways is a good metaphor for India because we are a khichdi. But when you turn that metaphor around on its head and you say there's only one kind of khichdi and only one kind of recipe, you're basically insulting everything India stands for. And it was done essentially for political reasons to indicate that it was khichdi, not biryani, that Indians loved. And what has the consequence been? You look at Swiggy, you look at Zomato. The most ordered dish in every single city in India, north, south, east or west, is biryani. So it achieved nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know if Qorma, you can ask him afterwards. Okay.
And on that identity politics, again, I'm last, Thomas, is about the use of meat.
Yeah.
Which is that it is often termed as, oh, you're Muslim, you eat beef. Bleep. So you eat beef, right?
This is so completely bizarre because you've seen the statistics. The overwhelming majority of Indians are non-vegetarian. They're not vegetarian. If there is, and it's not just Hindu-Muslim, it's Hindu also, because the people who tend to be vegetarians tend to be the higher caste. The people who eat meat tend to be the lower caste. So even within Hinduism, there's a little bit of conflict going on there. But this characterization of meat eating as being something new that was brought in by invaders, it's just because if you were to look at ancient texts, if you were to look at what people ate in the Maurya Empire, the recipes that we've uncovered and discovered from Chandragupta's court, they cooked lizards, they cooked frogs, they cooked virtually every kind of animal, they cooked deer, they cooked stuff that we wouldn't dream of eating now. But it was fine. There was no sense of vegetarianism. Vegetarianism comes into Hinduism essentially from Jainism and from Buddhism. And even the Buddhists don't stick with it. If the Buddhists had stuck with vegetarianism, then the whole of Southeast Asia would be vegetarian, and it's not. Only the Jains stick with it, and they quickly become the slowest and growing and the smallest minority in India. I should know because I'm a Jain. and upper caste Hindus, Brahmins, Banyas accepted. And it then becomes a mark of piety and a mark of distinction. And anyone who eats meat is therefore supposed to be engaging in non-Hindu behavior, which means that most Hindus are non-Hindu because most Hindus eat meat.
Yeah, yeah. Usually, meat-wise, I think the reason why people would pull lizards and similar, the smaller the meat, the tastier it is.
I have not had lizard, but I'll take your word
I
for it.
haven't
I'll take your
I've had frog, not lizard. Frog
You had
tastes good.
frog? Yeah, I've had frog. Frogs are like chicken.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tastes good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I had in Malaysia, not in France, but yeah. So smaller the animal, bird, tastier the meat is. Bigger it is. Like you would not dare eat dinosaur if you ever happen to have dinosaur.
Depends.
All right. On that, I will open the platform for people, and I don't know if I have this volunteer. The 3, 1, 2, 3, and the 4. We'll come to that. All right.
I just had a question on how, once the Indian Railways started getting built up, what effect that had on food, because there's so many things we attach directly to the railways.
Yeah.
Because the first thing in my head is railway mutton curry, and there are various things which go along with that. I mean,
If you look at railway mutton curry and dishes served on the railways, there are many countries where, say, the club sandwich in America was created as a railway dish. There used to be a food car in the American Railroad, which is called the club car. And the club sandwich was invented there. If you look in India for similar dishes, there aren't that many. But what the railways did was allow the transportation of food. In those days, if you had hunger in one part of India and a surplus in the other part of India, people starved. The railways made it possible for food to go from one part of India to another. Often the journeys were overnight, so vegetables which would not have lasted if you'd send them by bullock cart or would have changed. So the railways did change Indian food, but mainly in the sense of transportation, sadly not in the sense of gastronomy. Yeah.
Railway give us chai as well.
Yeah.
There's one question here, there. Sure.
They'll give you a mic.
So, as you just said, what according to you consider as typical Delhi ka khana? So, like what you said was,
But I began by saying there's no such thing.
That was for
There
you.
is every community in Delhi has its own food, and there is nothing typical about it. Even within communities, there's variations on food. I always say the key to understanding India is to realize that there is no one India, one cuisine. We are many in one, and we have many, many typical cuisines.
no, like I mean, it really pays. I mean, I am a typical Delhi wala, as I consider myself. When people from outside Delhi, I mean, we Delhi walas, we call ourselves Delhi Dilwalo ki, and we welcome everybody from outside Delhi.
How long has your family lived in Delhi?
3-4 generations.
Where did they come from originally?
Up to my understanding, they've been here for a while.
Yeah,
And
but
we
before
have
that, they must have come from
UP,
somewhere, no?
Bihar.
So presumably when they came,
Yeah.
the people who were living in Delhi before that regarded them as outsiders also, no?
Yeah,
That's the way it works in every city.
So I mean, the people who are saying that they have, there's nothing as the original Delhi ka whatever,
No, there are many original Delhi cuisines. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
All I am saying is there is no one cuisine that dominates over the others.
Yeah. So what exactly would you consider original Delhi ka?
I don't consider any one cuisine original. I consider whatever you eat at home and you've eaten for 4 generations, your typical cuisine and good for you.
Something like Biryani, aloo, Nahari, or Delhi ki biryani.
But see, a lot of people who eat bedmi aloo won't eat nihari. So how would you say which one is typical? No?
So a few of those dishes, maybe you can.
Okay, you're the expert. Tell
I
us
think
some typical
Bedmi
Delhi.
UP people will say we call it Benai.
Yeah, that's what.
So that's UP thing. Nahari again.
Nihari is also subject to some
Lucknow and
dispute.
Delhi
No?
fight. Then the third thing you mentioned about
Biryani.
biryani again. Delhi, Lucknow, they keep fighting. So there's
Butter chicken, invented in Delhi, being decided by Delhi High Court. Nothing more Delhi than that.
that's the butter chicken and chole bhature. That's the only Delhi food.
Chole bhature, Amritsar claims.
हाँ,
Amritsar claims chole bhature.
Bhature Amritsar, sorry. So butter chicken is very easy.
Only typical Delhi thing I can think of is butter chicken. Even tandoori chicken came from Peshawar.
Okay.
There's a question there as well.
Yeah.
It is because soup cooker.
Really? Okay.
Which is lal and cooker is
The chicken, yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
My question may bring some kind of smile on your face, but we have a very kind of a fierce and hot debate in my office. Is there something called vegetarian biryani?
But you see,
Yes.
this is a sort of non-stop Twitter debate, and it's dedicated to the assumption that biryani was invented in North India and it was always going to be a mutton dish, and vegetarian biryani is this namby-pamby nonsense made by guys who don't really have the guts to do mutton. But it's true only if you take in that limited North Indian context. In South India, they will use the same technique with vegetables. So yes, I think there is, just as there is no one biryani, there is no one meat or vegetable you can use with biryani. Anything you do, I think is fine. You have a different view on that?
No, just adding on. In fact, the inventors of biryani, Shahjahan's era, if you pick up the book Nuskha Shahjahani, you will have a paneer biryani. So it's very vegetarian. The fight will continue.
Paneer biryani?
Paneer biryani.
So Shahjahan was secret Punjabi. It's good.
There's also something called Noon Mahali biryani, which was named after Noon Mahal. All vegetarian.
I want to ask a question.
So there's two more there. Yes, there's one, and then we'll come to you, and then we'll come to you.
Hi.
I think, hello. I think you didn't make any comment about Nahari, Qorma, Keema, and the special rotis of Delhi like Bakar Khani and Jafar
True.
Khani and all.
This is true. One day I'll do a conversation on great dishes of Delhi and I will invite you.
Okay,
But
thank you so
this
much.
is not that conversation.
My question was the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nuances between Nahari, Qorma, and say stew, which is available.
Yeah, one of the reasons I'm not having this discussion is because this man is a much better expert on this than I am. So
That's
he's the
a
guy.
whole lot longer discussion.
Yeah, it's a longer discussion. But yes, we should do a discussion on what makes Delhi Nihari special, what makes it different, what is the Delhi Qorma. I didn't want to do it because this was historical, but it's a discussion worth doing to both people.
Hi, yes. So firstly, actually, you were one of my first publishers, as in I was a freelance contributor to the HT OPED page back in the day.
Okay.
Early 2000s when Amit Sen Gupta was working there.
Yeah.
And I wrote a piece called The Spicy Subcontinent, which is based on exactly what you're talking about. That all these spices, some coming from Spain and different coasts, there is no such thing as a typical subcontinental or Delhi cuisine.
Yeah.
But the other aspect, which I think Sadaf and you have touched on in some of your writings, which would be great to have as a future conversation, was a follow-up I wrote called The Persecuted Pilaf. This was about the exile of the Arabs when they fled from the Inquisition, and they brought a lot of the Spanish spices to the Comoran coasts on both sides, and how human migrations brought not just nice traders coming along and bringing food for Shah Jahan to cook in Lal Killa, but these actual persecuted communities, especially the Jews and the Muslims who fled Spain, how they brought a lot of that, and it's become such a taken for granted part. It's not just potato from the Portuguese, but it's actual exiled people and political developments
That's very
that have
interesting,
brought food into the subcontinent. So I just saw
Yeah,
that.
that's a good discussion. It's a good book, in fact, because when they were thrown out by the Spaniards and they were given like days to go, they had to find places and they had to find ways to work. Yeah, it's a good discussion.
Sure. Thank you so much.
You're getting the mic.
I'd ask two questions actually. I'd asked for one.
Yeah.
But I'll ask two. One is that once in Maurya, Imtiaz Qureshi had a fair, he had a party where we had 107 biryanis, which included pan, which included, I can't even, paneer must have been one of them, but I have no idea, I didn't look at that.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that, like, having a prawn biryani as an example, because we haven't talked about fish and seafood at all. But fish should also be talked about. That is one. So he made so many. So why? Yes, but you're right that meat, mutton, goat mutton is the major thing. The other thing I will really request you is the difference. You know, like we use Qorma, curry, mutton curry, for example, or Rogan Josh. And such. We use them as if they were the same term.
Which of course they're not.
Huh?
Which of course they're not.
Yeah. So I will be very happy for the fine distinction that exists.
That's exactly what we were saying.
Josh, Qorma, and the so-called mutton curry. I would like
But
to.
it's actually a very important question. That's why we should do a separate discussion. Many years ago, must have been the 1990s, we had the first chefs conference, and I was attending, and Manjeet Gill was one of the people attending. Manjeet was, I think, the executive chef of the Maurya. He wasn't quite the legendary figure he is now. And there was an Indian chef who ran a very successful restaurant in Melbourne, or maybe Sydney. And he got up and he said, you guys have to change your food. Because like when I make a Rogan Josh, I take all the fat out. I make a healthy Rogan Josh. And Manjeet got up and he said, do you know what the word Rogan Josh means? Do you understand why the fat is important? You can call it a korma, you can call it a curry, you can call it like, but you cannot take a dish and then take away its defining characteristics and call it. But he didn't see the point. So you're right, it's not just ordinary people, even chefs don't see the point.
Yeah. It also almost a lot of curries, both gravy-based dishes, be it veg or non-veg, or meat actually, depends on the cuts and idea. What is the thing about? Just a second, we'll have two questions here. There's one here.
Just to go back to the railway issue.
Yeah.
Would you agree that simply because the time and distance factor was such that you needed new ingredients? For example, I saw a recipe on the internet and made it. It says imli mutton curry में railway mutton curry में imli जरूर डालें क्योंकि वो preserve करता था. Now I don't know how far that was true, but that was a point which stuck in my head.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. It's a good point because you were making dishes that had to survive for long journeys. You couldn't really stop and go to the market and everything. Yeah. So there must be other examples. Thank you. It's a good idea. Yeah.
Question that side.
My question is from Janab Sadaf Hussain.
Oh, very good.
Okay. Because I joined the talk in between when you were discussing about the gender roles. So my question...
It was towards the end.
Not even the middle.
As you are a chef and within the food industry, I am like, as you were talking about the gender role and the household as well, and you are a chef within the food industry, a chef and a household. Both profession is related to food industry, let's say. Industry, I'm saying, to name a chef, to mention him as a chef, he'll belong to a formal economy, right? But household belong to informal economy. So I'm able to observe, or let's say I'm able to spot hierarchy and dichotomy within the food industry. So as a professional chef, how do you perceive it?
I call myself a cook, to be honest. I call myself as Khan Sama Bawarchi. For many reasons. One reason is because I'm not a degree chef, right? I just maal dhal ke seekh liya.
Which is true, but you've ducked her question.
No, I'm answering that well. I'm answering that well. In a kitchen setup, I think the hierarchy is needed only because imagine like an office setup, right? You have different kinds of people. So that's why the hierarchy is there in the office. Like you report into somebody and somebody reports into the manager reports. So the same hierarchy. A couple of days back, actually years back, I was having a conversation with one of the chefs, Chef Ashish Bhasin, and he was talking about the word chef itself. So now the restaurant chefs are trying to call themselves as cooks, and then the home cooks are calling themselves the home chefs, right? So that's a different branding altogether. Chef is a term, comes from chief, captain. Not everybody is a captain of a ship, right? So that's a hierarchy there. But home, you're just cooking for 2 people or 4 people or 5 people. So that if you're talking about the hierarchy, then ghar pe, of course, there's no hierarchy as such. Of course, the hierarchy will be family hierarchy, that who eats first. If you're traditionally, man will eat first, or the boys will eat first versus then the women will eat first. Changing to an extent in the modern times for good. Was I able to answer the question? No.
Sort of. Okay. I'm glad you answered that, not me. Somebody else.
There's one, and we'll come. There's one here.
So, can I ask, majority of chefs, whether in India or all over the world, are men. What are the challenges the women chef have in today's world?
If one of us was a woman chef, we'd be able to give you a good answer.
Is there a woman chef here?
If there is, or I don't know.
No, but they faced, I'll answer that for you, they faced tremendous challenges. Probably less in India. India kitchens are more professionalized. But in France and in England, kitchens are very nasty, loutish, male-driven things, and they don't take women seriously. They say you'll get married, you'll have children, you'll give it up. So any woman who makes it in a professional kitchen in the West, it's a huge, huge achievement. And even in India, someone like Manisha Bhasin, who's like the top chef at ITC, has made it only because of her brilliance and her hard work.
Yeah, hi. Can I ask another question?
No, somebody recognize somebody else. Yeah.
Hi, having heard this conversation, I feel like going out and eat biryani because my mouth is watering.
Definitely.
But I asked this question. I know that what will be the answer of Vir, but still I must ask this. Because this has been going on for quite some time, for a long time, in fact. But ever since we got mobile phones and WhatsApp chats, it has been increasingly debated in some groups that the vegetarians are little less violent and meat eaters are violent.
Okay.
And the people who don't eat mutton much or meat much, they are pacifist, little pacifist. How true is it, or is it a propaganda again propagated by the same group which wants one homogeneous, one country, one kind of culture, one kind of dress in this country?
Sir, I am a Gujarati, and you're most welcome to come to Gujarat in the communal riot and see how pacifistic Gujaratis are. We're not. And we're all vegetarians. And I also wish to point out, you probably don't know this, the most famous vegetarian in history was Adolf Hitler.
Also, I feel like the anger is a different issue altogether. People can be just angry on anything. It is said, agreed.
Yeah.
But also the other thing is, interesting fact that I point out is a lot of vegetarians will forcefully tell the meat eaters not eat meat. However, the meat eaters will almost often not force meat down your throat. So you can see who's getting more angry.
You can tell which one is the fascist. No?
All right, we'll have 3 to 4 more questions before we wrap up.
But before you wrap up, you have to tell us where to go.
That I will come and tell you, no? That I'll come and tell you.
Those are trade secrets. Go.
Any other questions?
In the West or in India? In the West, it's been going on for centuries. And the original reason for marination was not to add flavor, but to tenderize the meat. And in India, too, we've been using papaya for a long time. So marination now is used also to add flavor, but essentially it was tenderization. No, it was in London or Paris, but all this came later.
Do we have more questions?
Just one quick
Yes.
point to add. Have
Yeah.
you become more intolerant about food than the people maybe 300-400 years ago? Because they seem to be more open to using all these different influences. चाहे मूरिश हो, चाहे निहारी हो, जो जमुना की नदी में के वजह से प्रॉब्लम हो गया, उसको अलग रूप दिया गया. Do you think we are more intolerant of food? And is it really true, connected to this, when you talk to Western chefs? I lived there for 15 years, and one of the things that really destroyed me is apparently if you don't tip them well enough, they'll spit in your food. And I was told this constantly, that you're a stingy desi, you have to pay at least $10 tip no matter.
But how? Yeah, the tip comes at the end. By then it's too late to piss in your food or whatever, right?
These are like Indians are stingy, confused people. तुम
Yeah.
tip ही देते हो और फिर अगली बारी आओगे, हाँ अगली
Yeah.
बारी आओगे, वो तुम्हारे खाने में थूक के लाएंगे.
I-
I've heard this like in 1,000 places. I don't know if this is myth or
It's actually very difficult to do because in all Western kitchens now, they are constantly under CCTV surveillance. So they wouldn't get away with it.
So I'll add a funny incident on that. When I was in school, there was always this discussion about that Muslims spit in their food and that's why the food tastes good, right? So that's understandable.
I had no idea, really?
Yeah, in the school there was a...
Okay,
but that's understandable.
The
Okay,
stuff
Hindu, Muslim.
people believe, yeah.
But then within Shia Sunni as well, there was a discussion where they will say the Shia food
Who were
tastes
the
good.
spitters? The Shias?
So, no, so for Sunnis they were Shia, for Shia they were Sunnis.
Mad.
So essentially they spit on the food and it tastes good, apparently. That's the secret sauce. Nobody will tell you.
Really guys who told me just 3 months ago, and he didn't know I had half Shia history. He said कि ये गुनहगारों, I can't go into the words he used, but he said ये खाने में थूक के देते हैं, मैं पंडितों के साथ बैठ के खा लूँगा, पर इनके साथ नहीं खाऊँगा. And I was like, by the way, मैं खुद Shia हूँ. And he got a shock of his life.
That's a secret sauce. All right, there's one more question somewhere. Sorry. And then maybe we'll wrap up if there's no more question.
Yeah.
Question
to Vir.
Yeah,
Can you
hi.
talk about the restaurants culture in it? And especially
Sorry?
in Delhi?
So you'll start again. You'll have to start again. Somebody interrupted.
About the restaurant culture in Delhi, like you lived in Delhi for long, right? So
Yeah.
what's been your favorite restaurants and how they've changed and how the eating out scene has changed? And
I
also, why
think-
is that restaurant favorite
I
restaurant?
don't, I keep being asked this. I don't have a favorite restaurant. I don't have a favorite dish. I don't have a favorite cuisine. I'm fairly promiscuous when it comes to my choices. But there are many, many good restaurants in Delhi. Many of them, unfortunately, are expensive. But there are some good ones which I think are not so expensive. But if you want to find out what I think, I run an organization called Culinary Culture, and we give out stars. So you can check that list. Yeah.
And on one last question, and we wrap up.
Yeah. Would you like to say something on the recent controversy who invented butter chicken in Delhi?
I've written an article, but for those of you who are interested and don't know the background is as follows. Tandoori chicken, we think, was invented by a restaurant called Moti Mahal in Peshawar. Post-partition, or just before partition, Moka Singh, who owned Moti Mahal, came to Delhi. So did the people who worked for him. 3 or 4 of them, accounts differ, opened a Moti Mahal in Delhi with the permission of Moka Singh, who allowed them to do it. It opened at a location, did not do well, shifted to Daryaganj, where it did extremely well. They then apparently, and this is also in some dispute, invented the chicken tikka as distinct from the tandoori chicken at this Delhi location. Now opinions vary. 2 of the partners, both called Kundan, oddly enough. There's a guy called Kundan Lal Gujral, who was the public face of the restaurant, a flamboyant guy with big mustaches, etc. He says that they had to do something, well, he's alleged to have said, do something with the leftover tandoori chicken, because as you know, the reason refugees and people liked tandoori cooking was because you could put 6 chickens on a skewer, so you could, with very little expense, you could quickly make many, many dishes. But that meant that you had a wastage, that meant that there were chickens left over at the end of the day. And so therefore, he didn't know what to do with them. So he invented a sauce with cream and butter and tomatoes, and that was the birth of butter chicken. Later, because he liked that sauce so much and it was so appreciated, he took Punjabi black dal, which never had tomatoes in it, and he added a version of that sauce into that dal, creating the dal makhani that all restaurants now serve and which is the basis for dal bukhara. Now, there is a second version, which is that another of the partners, a man called also Kundan Lal Jaggi, actually was in charge of the kitchen. And the Jaggi version is that one day a group of people came and they didn't have enough food to feed them. So he cut up a tandoori chicken, created this sauce, and served it to them. It would have sort of stayed there, and nobody really cared. When you eat a dish, do you care who invented it? But the descendants of Jaggi opened a restaurant called Daryaganj, in which they said from the inventors of butter chicken. Now, Moti Mahal continues to do well. Daryaganj is doing extremely well. They could have coexisted. The owners of one branch, Moti Mahal are now many different companies of Moti Mahal, Kundan Lal Gujral's grandchildren have sued Daryaganj, saying that Gujral invented it, not Jaggi. I do not know how any court can decide, because nobody was present in the kitchen. Nobody knows. It's one man's worth against another. In my view, it's probably the most pointless lawsuit in history, but let's see how it goes. Yeah?
Of 250 crore.
Yeah, that's right. Absurd. Yeah.
It's actually very Punjabi thing to do, and I'm half Punjabi, so I know.
You're half Shia, you're half Punjab, you're half a lot of things. Yeah?
Half this and half that.
Okay.
Punjabi from Peshawar,
Okay.
but they are constantly looking for reasons to fight. I can tell you that.
All right. Okay.
Ghalib said that he was half Muslim.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that. I'm Indian and that defines me, doesn't it?
Okay.
All right. On
Okay.
that note, we will have the questions follow up. On that note, we will wrap up the session. Thank you, Vir.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience.
And thank you everyone for coming.
Sorry?
वो हम बाद में बात करेंगे ना ऐसे सेशन के बाद. All right. Thank you everyone.